Hello everyone and welcome to another video. My name's Keir Smith. The last video I posted was on Roger Waters' Radio Chaos album, and after I completed that video my attention quickly turned to another important release of 1987, the rival album, if you will, Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason. But before I get to that, I wanted to go back a bit and cover Roger Waters' decision to leave the band, which in turn led to the making of A Momentary Lapse of Reason. If the cracks in Gilmour and Waters' relationship started to show during the making of The Wall, they were only further exacerbated during the making of the film. So I read and pulled some quotes that I thought were both interesting and relevant from around the time that A Momentary Lapse of Reason was being released. And David Gilmour said, "There are one or two things that happened during the film that I felt that I absolutely had to do, that I know Roger's never forgiven me on. Basically on obstructing him and telling him he had to stay in line on certain things. When you've got millions of dollars invested in a project, there are certain protections that you have to stick to that I felt I had to stick to. So I was the only one around who could actually take on the role of overruling him and telling him certain things that you couldn't do." He went further to say, "And I think that sort of period of our relationship became irreparably damaged and remained that way through the Final Cut album, which was torture, and, well, that leaves us where we are now, which is fine." So in December 1985, Roger Waters decided to leave Pink Floyd and said that he felt threatened by the contract that the band had with CBS Records. He felt as though he was being put under pressure to potentially produce new material for a new Pink Floyd album, and so he invoked a leaving member clause in his contract. Roger felt he wanted to pursue his own artistic direction and called Pink Floyd a spent force creatively, and he initiated legal proceedings in the High Court to formally dissolve Pink Floyd. But Dave Gilmour said, and again I quote, "We hadn't been served any actual writs. Nothing had actually been done in a court against us. There were papers served against us which are for 2 or 3 court issues, but nothing like an injunction or anything." Dave Gilmour said that he made it clear to Roger Waters that if Roger Waters was to leave the band, that David Gilmour would carry on with the Pink Floyd name, make no bones about it. To which Roger retorted, "You'll never effing do it." So Dave Gilmour called up some friends and musicians and played around with some demos that were initially going to be recorded for his third solo album. Keyboardist John Carrin, friend and lyricist Anthony Moore came in, as did Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music fame. Pink Floyd drummer Nick Mason was on board for the sessions but didn't play an awful lot of drums, feeling that he was out of practice. And though Pink Floyd keyboardist Richard Wright is also back and credited on the album, he wasn't a fully fledged member of Pink Floyd yet after being sacked during the making of The Wall. There was a clause in his contract that prevented him from becoming a full-time member again at this stage. And so everyone got down to work and put all of their efforts into making the best possible Pink Floyd album that they could. It was a daunting task, and Dave Gilmour was under no illusions as to how difficult it was going to be. He later said in an interview, and again I quote, "Lurching into the future, bearing the mantle of Pink Floyd without Roger in 1987 was always going to be a tough one, as anyone can imagine." After a long battle that lasted nearly 2 years between Pink Floyd's camp and Roger Waters' camp, Roger Waters eventually settled out of court 2 days before Christmas in 1987, by which point A Momentary Lapse of Reason had already been released. Roger Waters retained the rights to The Wall and to the famous inflatable pig that you see on the front cover of Animals, but on Pink Floyd's following tour they got around that quite easily by designing another pig. A Momentary Lapse of Reason was released on the 7th of September 1987, nearly 3 months after the release of Roger Waters' Radio Chaos album. But is A Momentary Lapse of Reason any good? Could it possibly hold up against the great works that Pink Floyd had previously done, which Roger Waters was undoubtedly fundamental to? I'll take you through the album now. The aptly titled Signs of Life opens the album in a very nice and mellow, atmospheric way. You hear the sound of a rowing boat, which is Dave Gilmour's boatman rowing by the boat cum studio that Pink Floyd recorded A Momentary Lapse of Reason on. It's Nick Mason's distorted vocal that comes in reading from an unknown poem. When the childlike view of the world went, nothing replaced it, nothing replaced it. You hear some rather gloomy sounding synthesizers, which I quite like, and then Dave Gilmour's guitar shines through and he plays some lovely melodic parts. And the spoken word intro kind of harks back to the voices that you hear on Speak to Me at the start of The Dark Side of the Moon, and it also reminds me a little bit of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. So immediately it feels like you're listening to Pink Floyd. You're in familiar territory. The next song is the lead single for the album, Learning to Fly, which Dave Gilmour and Nick Mason were both doing during the making of the album. It comes in loud and really jumps out of the speakers with booming drums and some great guitar playing from Gilmour. It both rocks and rolls and creates, for me, a really catchy groove. The verses are great, the lyrics are simple, direct, but good, and it's got a great chorus, and I especially love the female backing vocals when they come in on the chorus. The guitar solo from Gilmour is superb, and this is 80s bombast, but in the best way. I really think that Learning to Fly is a great Pink Floyd song. I never tire of hearing it, which is more than can be said for the next track, The Dogs of War. Now, we already had the brilliant Dogs on Animals. This seems superfluous, and this is really loud and bombastic in a not so good way. The jarring to and froing of those synthesizers reminds me of Welcome to the Machine. I do kind of like the lyric, Dogs of War and Men of Hate, with no cause, we don't discriminate. This is a bit too overblown for me. The sax solo is good to begin with, but tends to go on a bit too long for me. And the song turns into this rather cool jam towards the end of the song, but again, it's all a bit too loud and a bit too heavy, and yeah, it's a bit much. But then we get One Slip with its digital alarm clocks and various drum patterns being played on the long intro before Dave Gilmour's shimmering and melodic guitar lines break through. And I remember when I first heard this song and thought straight away, that sounds like Time and that sounds a bit like Run Like Hell. But I love the lyrics to this song, which I believe were largely written by Phil Manzanera. I will, she sighed at my request, and then she tossed her mane while my resolve was put to the test. But the chorus is absolutely fantastic. I love this chorus. One slip and down the hole we fall. It seems to take no time at all. A momentary lapse of reason. And the girls are great on backing vocals once again, but for me, this is one of Dave Gilmour's very best vocals on a Pink Floyd album. On the Turning Away, starts off slow but turns into a big, epic guitar ballad. It's a beautiful song, from the minimal echo of the opening to the gentle acoustic strum, the warm empathy of Gilmour's voice and the lyrics I find genuinely moving. No more turning away from the weak and the weary. No more turning away from the coldness inside. Just a world that we all must share. It's not enough just to stand and stare. Is it only a dream that there'll be no more turning away? The screaming guitar solos in the middle and at the end of the song, the choir-like vocals that back that big chorus. Oh, it's fantastic. I absolutely love On the Turning Away. Another great song, a truly great song. So side one of the record closes with On the Turning Away, and side two opens with Yet Another Movie, which for me is the most interesting song on the album. It's a slow burning, moody and atmospheric track with, again, a big drum sound and a haunting melody with strong lyrical imagery that gives it a cinematic quality. Now that's quite the build-up, but I think this is a great track, and again, Gilmour plays some great guitar parts throughout this song. And of course, it's from this song that we get the inspiration for the album cover, from the lyric, A Vision of an Empty Bed. In particular, though I'm not sure why, I really like that lyric, Man in Black, Snow White Horse, a pointless life has run its course. And again, we hear a lot of spoken word dialogue, especially towards the end of the song, which keeps things interesting. I think Yet Another Movie is a standout track on the album, and I've always thought that it doesn't necessarily sound like anything that Pink Floyd have done before, but it sounds very much of the time it was recorded in and feels like a Pink Floyd song, like a natural progression as to where they would go in the 80s. And then we get a short instrumental piece tagged on the end of Yet Another Movie called Round and Around, We hear this throbbing synthesizer and some short, slick guitar licks from Gilmour. Very nice. And that brings us to A New Machine Part 1, which is an interesting and experimental piece. It's very minimalist, but Gilmour seemed very pleased with it. In an interview in 1992, he said, "The noise gates, the vocoders, opened up something new which, to me, seemed like a wonderful sound effect that no one had done before. It's quite doom-laden, but I rather like it. Do you ever get tired of the waiting? Do you ever get tired of being in there? Don't worry, nobody lives forever. Nobody lives forever." It sounds urgent, like it needs to be heard, and I like that about it. So that brings us to Terminal Frost, which has a cool, recurring 4-note keyboard motif running through the song. And this is an instrumental which is rather long at over 6 minutes, but it doesn't outstay its welcome and it builds in a very pleasing way. Gilmour certainly knows how to build a track. And this song has Nick Mason on electronic drums and Richard Wright on synthesizer, piano and organ, making it a truly collaborative Floyd effort here. It does also have a host of session musicians on it too, including the great Tony Levin on bass. But once again, the female backing vocals are used to great effect here and soar along with Dave Gilmour's great guitar work once again. And Tom Scott and John Helliwell share saxophone duties and do so impressively. And if you put all of that together, then you get quite possibly the most Floyd sounding thing on the whole album. But as I said with Yet Another Movie, it sounds like a natural progression, like Pink Floyd are updating their sound. And it works. It's a really nice piece, Terminal Frost. I really enjoy it. And then we get A New Machine Part 2, which sound-wise is exactly the same as A New Machine Part 1, but with a slight variation on the lyrics. I will always be here. I will always look out from behind these eyes. It's only a lifetime. Which brings us to the album closer, the magnificent Sorrow. That big guitar sound at the start. It sounds like a chainsaw revving up, followed by that pulsing synth bass and the rock-steady power of the drumming. You know it's going to be something big. And I've always been a little bit confused by Dave Gilmour's lack of confidence when it comes to writing lyrics, because when you read these lyrics you think, what's all of the fuss about? These are absolutely brilliant. A man lies and dreams of green fields and rivers, but awakes to a morning with no reason for waking. He's haunted by the memory of a lost paradise. In his youth or a dream he can't be precise. He's chained forever to a world that's departed. It's not enough. It's not enough. His hand has weakened at the moment of truth. His step has faltered. This is great stuff. And we get that nice atmospheric break in the middle of the song, which again is really nice. One world, one soul, time pass, the river roll. And lyrically the song ends in a strong way with that final verse. There's an unceasing wind that blows through this night. There's dust in my eyes that blinds my sight, and a silence that speaks so much louder than words of promises broken. And then Gilmour plays one of his mightiest and lengthiest guitar solos. It is fantastic. He really lets go here. Brilliant. And talking about this album, Roger Waters referred to Dave Gilmour's lyrics as third rate. Get out of it. These are brilliant. And Sorrow is a brilliant Pink Floyd song, musically and lyrically. So that's A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Well, I really like the album. I always have and I always will. It's an album that flows really well and it starts and finishes very strongly too, which I think is always important. And I think it's an interesting album musically too. The songs, the instrumentals, it's a really good listen. I've always scored this album highly, and within Pink Floyd's lengthy discography, I'd say that I prefer this to A Saucer Full of Secrets, Ummagumma certainly, Atom Heart Mother, and even Medal, dare I say it. But I will address the elephant in the room. Is A Momentary Lapse of Reason really a Pink Floyd album? No, not really. If Nick Mason and Richard Wright had more of a creative input on the album and indeed played more on the album, then sure, it would pass as a Pink Floyd album, as the Division Bell certainly does some years later. But admittedly, this is Dave Gilmour plus session musicians plus additional writers helping out, and they're all getting together and creating what Dave Gilmour thought the next Pink Floyd album should sound like. But you know what? I think they did a really good job. I'm certainly glad we've got A Momentary Lapse of Reason, and I've always thoroughly enjoyed this album. And naturally, Roger Waters was asked what he thought of the album and scoffed at it, typically. He said, I quote, "I think it's a very facile but quite a clever forgery. If you don't listen to it too closely, it does sound like Pink Floyd." And with the considered intention of setting out to make something that sounds like everyone's conception of a Pink Floyd record, it's inevitable that you will achieve that limited goal. Now that may sound like sour grapes, but he's not too far from the truth, I don't think. But the album was, without doubt, a huge success, going in at number 3 on the charts, both sides of the Atlantic, and it sold millions of copies and breathed new life into Pink Floyd. Not everyone was aboard this new Gilmour-led Pink Floyd, but I for one am really glad it happened. But please let me know down in the comments section below what you think of all of this. What do you think to Roger Waters leaving the band? Was it really Pink Floyd after that? Do you like a momentary lapse of reason? Let me know. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you for my next one sometime soon. Until then, bye for now.